It's something we all have, whether we realize it or not, and that is bias. And that's what we're talking about on the Limitless Leadership Lounge today. We appreciate you having us on, whatever you're doing. Maybe you're watching on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube and you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, we'd greatly appreciate that. It's a newer channel. We're really ramping up the YouTube game because, podcasting is not just on those audio platforms now. We also have it on the video platform. So if you're on those audio platforms, we'd love a review up on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to. We'd love it if you just take a couple seconds to write us a quick review to help us reach more people and give us feedback. And if you're on YouTube, just hitting that subscribe button would be hugely appreciated. So I'm John Gehring, joined as always by Coach Jim Johnson and Dr. Rehnuma Karim. We all have something called bias. A lot of times it's unconscious, sometimes it's very conscious. And when we think about bias, we think a lot about race and gender, but we're going to talk about even more than that today. Dr. Karim joins us from Bangladesh. And Dr. Karim, it's great to have you on. I know you've unfortunately been a victim of bias. I'm sure you have biases yourself. Tell us the first of three ways that we're going to talk about today to help us overcome bias that drags us down as leaders.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Coach. I've been in a hiatus for a few days, few weeks. It's good to be back. I am in Bangladesh right now, and it's a developing country, and we often think that all the biases are against us. So I agree, we do have biases against people who are coming from developing country. One of the biases even in workforce, when I first joined the university in SUNY, there was one person who used to think that I might not be able to speak in English. So that person, being a leader, would like spell out things in front of my face, or like, do you understand all those elements? And when you say those words patronizing, you feel that you don't feel that respect for the other person. But I tried to understand, I tried to be to empathize, like probably she is, because she is from a different environment, she was not exposed to international cultures. That is why she is reacting this way. So when I talked about, like, I got angry at the beginning, I got angry, I reacted, but then again I calmed down and I sent her some materials on how to address biases, how to not act like arrogant with other races or other culture. But interesting, there are some people who are open-minded about it, some people who are closed-minded about it. For example, I really appreciate Coach Jim Johnson. So he would always say that I don't understand some of the elements of this culture. Renuma, could you explain? And that is when I really appreciate and respect Coach and John, because you are trying to understand and then I explain it. Definitely, all of us are not going to know everything about all the other culture, how to act, how not to act. But when we are asking the question, we are opening up, showing curiosity. That's when the other party is also going to open up, and we are
Yeah.
not going to be defensive. So one of the things that I have experienced, that if you open up, if you ask question, those are the way you can start addressing your own biases. What are the information I have? Because biases are sometimes those beliefs that we are born with. Like, we have seen those things around us. Often it becomes a habit in our head. Like, automatically, I don't want to do it, but I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So we need to like reframe our thoughts, also step back, and before something comes out of my mind, just think that, am I going to hurt that person? If I'm in that person's shoes, how am I going to, what would I have done? So I think when we have those compassion, understanding, and especially nowadays, this is a challenging time with the DEI challenges in all the institution. That doesn't mean that we are not going to address diversity and addressing biases and stereotypes which we have inside us. More we learn, more we can overcome those things. creating more equitable environment.
Yeah, so learn something about others. I mean, that's one of that's the first key is just that opportunity
Right.
to learn and ask questions. Coach, I know you have key number two here as we're talking about overcoming bias.
Yeah, so for me, it's understanding that there is bias and we all have them, some more extreme than others, but understand that you have to face it and then you got to figure out who you are as a person, as a leader. I try to be as unbiased as I can. I know I'm not perfect, but as Rehnuma said, so I think the thing that we have to do in being biased is address the fact that they're out there and what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to respond and react to different biases? So I'll give you examples. Just to give you context, John lives in the same town that I live, Greece, the biggest suburb of Rochester. John has seen much more diversity in our town. When I grew up, I had 300 and something students in my graduating class, and I think we had two African American students and we had maybe three or four Hispanic students. It's way different today in our community, as John would vouch for. But at the same time, I didn't feel like I was. I probably had some biases, but I didn't feel like I was ever prejudiced. Well, I got into coaching and I came back and coached at Greece Olympia High School, one of the high schools in my town that I grew up in. And in the early 90s, we had an African American young man come in, and literally he was born in Nigeria and then came over to the United States. And his name was Alex, and he transferred into our program as a junior in high school. And after the season started, I started to realize that a couple of my white players were prejudiced, and they did not like Alex. And to add some craziness is Alex, he lived with an older brother, and he was supposed to move with his brother before the season, but my aunt ended up taking him in. My aunt, of course, is white like me, and she's taken an African American. But the really cool thing is Alex ended up struggling. He was a very talented player and very bright. But I think with all the biases that he ran into, and I've tried to really be supportive, but my aunt was awesome to him. And after his 2 years, his dream was to get a college basketball scholarship. And it didn't come to fruition. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that he had a lot of resistance from his teammates that really made it more difficult on him. He had some other things he had to straighten out. He had to improve his attitude and he had to work harder. But my aunt never gave up on him. I kept pushing him, but I give her a lot of credit because he ended up going to a prep school and we kept sharing it. Alex, you still have control. So that's something we got to remember that you still have control of how you react and respond to different people. And the epiphany finally happened for Alex, and he did great at the prep school, and his dream came true. He got a full basketball scholarship to a school in Vermont in Division II. But the story doesn't end there. Alex ends up having a great career. He ends up being their senior athlete of the year. And then he gets an opportunity to go to MTV. And at MTV, you talk about biases. MTV did not have very much presence in Africa, where Alex is originally from. And he starts pushing them to get more uh, presence in Africa. And years after that, he ends up being the MTV Vice President of Africa Operations. So he
Nice.
overcame those biases. Really cool. And they're really, I sometimes share this in some of my presentations. A year after that, my aunt called me. She was all excited. And she says, Jim, you got to pick up Forbes magazine this week. I said, yeah, Midge, I don't read Forbes magazine. I read Sports Illustrated. She goes, well, you want to read Forbes this week? I said, why is that? Because Alex is on the cover. And so it's just amazing the things that we got to remember looking at yourself and giving people opportunities to overcome your bias is so important. It's something I got a very valuable lesson, and it helped me immensely as I became a better coach in handling people of different races and cultures. But the bottom line is, if you're going to have a great team, you've got to have everybody working together for the same common goal. So it was a great lesson for me in bias. John, how about you?
Oh, definitely. Wow. So, first two keys here when it comes to overcoming bias. Rehnuma talked about asking questions. Coach talked about staying true to yourself. I'm going to also add our third key here, which is all about setting the context and recognizing our own limitations. As
Mm,
somebody who grew up in a suburban, average, I guess you could say, American white neighborhood, it's easy to have these unconscious biases, and a lot of times we think of people as, they're either racist or they're not. They're either, and I'm
mm,
glad that I don't fall in that category of being racist. And I don't know a lot of people who do fall in that category of straight
mm,
up being racist. But I don't think it's so black and white like that. I think there's people like me out there who have the best of intentions and who never want to treat people differently for any reason, whether it be the color of their skin or where they're from or anything. But that doesn't mean that we're totally immune to biases. And that's the key, is it still doesn't mean that. And we're so afraid of being labeled as somebody who has those biases or somebody who doesn't treat people fairly. And rightfully so. We should be, somewhat afraid of that. But I think sometimes our fear of that leads us to not even be honest with ourselves about the biases that we might have. So we
mm,
may not share the fact that we grew up in this type of environment. So I think just being upfront and being okay with being upfront and honest and setting the context with other people in our lives and saying, look, this is how I grew up. Obviously, the content of my character. This in no way reflects me as a person. I'm going to stay true to myself, as Coach says, but because of this, who knows? There may be some biases that might come out even in very subtle ways. I've noticed over the course of my career that sometimes I just talk to people differently depending on where they're from. And like Renuma said about that person who was explaining, and that sounds horribly offensive, but I can't say that I've never done that, and so just being aware that kind of thing exists, that sometimes it's unconscious, that it doesn't always define. I mean, there are instances where it
right.
does define the content of our character, and those are not good incidents. But I think being upfront and recognizing our own limitations and not living in this la la land of, oh no, I'm never racist, I would never ever ever dream of doing anything like that. Just recognizing that sometimes these things happen unconsciously and they can impact the way others feel, is just so important, because that's all about self-awareness. That's all about just being
Mm,
self-aware. It doesn't make us racist, it doesn't make us bad people. It just means that we have those limitations. So that's the third key, is just being open to those limitations and setting that context up for other people when we're in conversations to say, look, this is my background. This may influence the way things are. Please help me. Please help educate me. And that's what, Renuma was saying. And Renuma, I'd love to get your thoughts about that too. Just, having that as the context of understanding our potential limitations depending on where we grew up or what environment we're used to.
yeah, John, it's so powerful. We need to give context to where we are coming from. I might, it will be totally wrong if I ever say that, oh, I'm never biased. Of course, I am biased. Because I grew up in a different environment, that's why, and I have different experiences, which also added a lot of information to my biases. But one thing I am doing is, like I'm giving context when when I first came to teach the American students. I explained my biases and my limitations to
Mhm.
them. So this is what I do not understand. Sometime I'm not going to be able to be relatable to your culture. You need to help me out. I'm also going to not have the accent, the American accent, so I might sound funny, but you teach me what is the right accent. When I explained those contexts, automatically the students respected me. They did not make fun of me or anything behind my back, but oh, Dr. K, you can, this is the American English, you can, this is how we pronounce it. And I was open to it. I embraced my students teaching me the right accent or what is right or wrong in American culture. And that's how, with the communication, free flow of communication, I think we can overcome some of our limitations and the biases we have.
So again, those three things so important. Number one, as Dr. Karim said, was asking questions to help us overcome that bias. Coach talked about staying true to ourselves, and I talked about recognizing those potential limiting beliefs that we have, and understanding that that's okay to have those. So those are the ways that we want to help you overcome bias, but we'd love to hear your thoughts too. Limitlessleadershippodcast@gmail.com for any thoughts or questions or topic suggestions. And we'll be back with another guest next week on the Limitless Leadership Lounge.